There are multiple angles I could take this video from, and I really just want to take it from one of reporting the news around DC and talking about some stuff that happened with Superman that was just unfortunate regarding multiple people involved without pointing too many fingers. And that is around the situation starring Henry Cavill as Superman, which you might know is an era that, even though was once on top of the world with the release of Man of Steel, which actually did very, very well theatrically, it was an era that ended due to a lot of mismanagement, a lot of choices behind the scenes, choices in writing that didn't land with people. I mean, like, there was just at every level choices regarding the DCEU that caused it to fall apart. And Henry Cavill, I believe, truly was kind of the guy behind it all who got screwed, who didn't really have much to do with it in terms of he didn't write his character, in terms of he did show up and played his part, in terms of announcing a return as Superman essentially and then that going away. Now, before I get a lot of angry people, whether they're like pro James Gunn or anti James Gunn hardcore Zack Snyder people, I find myself in a weird position with this because there was a lot of new news revealed on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast the other day with an interview with James Gunn about the changing of the guard around WB and around DC and what happened to Henry in that time. And I find myself in an odd position because I'm someone who liked both that version of Superman and really liked the new version of Superman. I'm not saying I like everything, but I feel like I'm in an odd position where I'm one of the people who really enjoyed Man of Steel. I actually had fun with BVS despite its faults, and I gave a positive review of Zack Snyder's Justice League, but I went and saw the 2025 Superman film and I really enjoyed it. A couple of things I didn't connect with, like anything, and my review is on this channel if you're interested. But that said, I think a lot of people looking at this news, which largely involves Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson kind of pushing his way into DC at the time, changes he was trying to make, changes involving Henry Cavill, and then the changing of the guard to James Gunn and David Zaslav stepping in. I feel like I'm one of the people who's like not hardcore for or against the Snyderverse or even the DCEU. So it's kind of a weird thing to talk about because this whole thing was very poorly handled, I think, by so many different people. And there were a lot of quotes that James Gunn dropped the other day regarding it, including there were other people that had a take on what they wanted to do at DC and were trying to force their way, and it just was never a part of the equation for David Zaslav, who was the head of WBD. Now, there's a lot more with this interview that we're going to take a look at, but in general, without being, without completely throwing him under the bus by name, a lot of this kind of comes back to James Gunn revealing that at the time that the DCEU was falling apart, and this was after Zack Snyder had kind of moved away from it because WB pushed him away from it, following, the, I guess I would say, middling reviews around Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and then kind of pushing in this Justice League era with the Justice League, and then, kind of going off the rails in so many different directions and not having any real vision, and a lot of these movies doing poorly. Well, The Rock came in and had this idea of kind of recentering the universe around Superman and around a struggle with Black Adam and more superpowered characters and things like that. But it was already going in the direction of James Gunn being brought in. So this is something we're going to talk about for a few minutes, but I do have a question of the day for you, which is genuinely, how do you feel about that old universe, which I suppose there's kind of like two versions of it. There's almost the Snyderverse version and the DCEU itself. How do you feel about that universe, and would you ever want to see any of those characters or that universe come back in any way? Like, for me, when I'm looking at it, I would love to see like something animated in the future. I know a lot of hardcore people would not be satisfied with that, but for me, I've recently been reading some of the comics that continued Michael Keaton's Batman. I've been checking out some of the stuff that continued the Christopher Reeve Superman in the comics. Those kinds of things are fun. So it's like, I'm open to those universes, but I also understand that we're not very likely going to see a universe like that return in live action when you're trying to reboot. So I remember when Black Adam came out, I actually enjoyed the movie. I especially liked Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate. But during that time, it was kind of, according to James Gunn, an attempt, without straight up saying it, for someone to come in, rework that universe, but he had already been brought on. He had already been brought on to do Superman contractually at the time. And he answered questions about this in this interview saying, it's terrible. Believe it or not, the day we were dealing with trying to figure out if we could take the job at DC Studios, the day that the deal closed, all of a sudden, they were announcing that Henry was back. I was like, what's going on? We know what the plan is. The plan was to come in and do Superman. It was really unfair to him and a total bummer. So he straight up admitted, that this situation was unfair to him. And I think at the time, a lot of people who liked the Henry Cavill Superman were frustrated with James Gunn and said, well, screw you. I mean, because they just announced he was coming back. What the hell's your problem? But to me, this sounds like a really shitty situation where it's like he was brought in to just reboot the universe totally and do Superman. And the deal closed that day. And then WB is announcing, hey, by the way, Henry's back, check it out. And it's kind of like, it feels like there was mismanagement at every layer of that, and that there was no communication between these different layers. Now, there's a little more here, and he did say there was a vacuum at the time, and a lot of people had a take on what they wanted to do at DC, and they were trying to force their way in, and it was just never part of the equation. Saying we came in and that was really unfortunate. I'm like, this poor guy, referring to Henry. Now, he did go on and say that Cavill took it like an absolute gentleman, saying, he said, the only thing I ask is that I'm able to reveal it myself as opposed to coming from you guys. And I'm like, that's a class act. So the thing with Henry, I've always liked Henry personally. Any problems you might have around his character, I've never thought they were him. That's just me. I always thought that he showed up and he delivered the lines and he did his part that he was supposed to do personally. This is the same way I feel about Hayden Christensen. And I think a lot of people will actually look back on that Superman, that Snyder Superman, and regardless of problems they'll have, I think they will be able to realize that Henry was really nice about the whole thing and did actually show up, have a passion for the character, and want to do his best. And here's the thing, he also had reportedly wanted a more hopeful take on Superman for future movies. So that's something right there where it's like people, shit on his version. They say, oh, it's dark, it's depressing, it's dreary. He was one of the people championing for a little more hope behind the character. Now, what's interesting about this, too, is that James Gunn did say that he would love to put Cavill in a future film, saying that he even talked to him about it on that day. And, that the rest is kind of history. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff from that time that we will probably never know. But we always knew that the guard changed more than once. There was kind of this Snyder era of the DCEU when it was more like the Snyderverse. And it was going in a certain direction that Zack Snyder was building towards. He had a tragedy in his personal life. His daughter passed away. I think the people who make light of that and make fun of it because they hate Snyder fans and Snyder bros are pieces of shit. I think that that's really disgusting. At the same time, I think there have been unfortunately a lot of people that loved the Snyderverse that have been pieces of shit themselves to other people. Not just normal fans, but really mean-spirited people. And I think it's unfortunate because all of these things have been completely antithetical to the character of Superman and who he is regardless of the version of that character. The way certain people in the fandom have reacted around these pieces of news. Now for me, looking at the new universe, I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but I'm looking at what happened to Henry, I'm looking at what James said, I'm looking at David's new version, seeing David Corenswet on screen, and I actually really enjoyed it. I hope, first off, that Henry has success in the other things he does. I hope that he has success with things like Warhammer and Voltron, and I'm interested in seeing those things. I would also love, personally, to see his version of Superman return in a multiversal crossover, or in a cartoon, or a comic book, or whatever in the future. And there has even been a lot of talks about him appearing in the MCU or people trying to cast him or wanting him there. That would be cool too. I know my wife Jill said that that would be something fun to see. At the end of the day, for me, I think though that in general, I do wish a lot of things were handled differently. Do I blame James Gunn for taking the deal to come in and fix DC Studios? No. Do I blame The Rock, personally, me, for him looking at this and saying, oh wow, it would be really fun to be a superhero and this universe is falling apart. Let's try to reground it. Let's bring back Henry. Let's focus some stuff on me. Not really, no. Like, you can say it's self-serving. I understand that. What I do blame him for is if he knew at all that any of this was going down, which I don't know how he wouldn't know if he was this involved in, trying to put himself into DC. If he knew about that and then he was still pushing this direction, like if what James is saying is true, and it was like forcing his way in, I do blame that aspect of it on him. Like, I think that's shitty because that put Henry in such a bad position where it's like the dude got jerked around for years. And I feel the same way around the Ben Affleck Batman. Ben has said multiple times that he's done. He doesn't have any more interest. I truly believe he felt screwed over. I don't know how he feels now regarding the character and how everything went down. I don't blame these people for not wanting to do more, but in terms of that universe, like if they ever wanted to do a cartoon, like how they followed up the Adam West Batman with like the Batman and Two-Face movie and some stuff like that, I would love to watch that. That would be cool. If they ever wanted to do a comic, I'd love to see that. I was one of the people who went to all of these movies when they came out. Even in the waning years of the DCEU, I was going to those movies because I still had fun with them. They were still fun superhero movies to me. I think it's just sad to see how poorly the situation was handled, where reportedly Cavill was also kind of like pushed out a while back for not doing a specific cameo in Shazam that I believe Walter Hamada, who was up there in DC at the time, had wanted him to do. So you had these weird eras and generations, like you had Snyder and you had Jeff Johns being more involved and you had Walter Hamada being more involved, and then you had James Gunn coming in. But when James Gunn was coming in and being contracted to fix DC, The Rock had decided he was going to do it. And who was caught in the middle of all of this? Well, the very first character we saw really in terms of superheroes in the DCEU, Henry Cavill's Superman. It just sucks. It just sucks to see how it really sucks to see how it was handled. Like, I don't think it could be handled any worse in terms of like just bad circumstances around that character and around those versions of the character. And it makes me sad, because I can't imagine like being excited to play a superhero and coming in and then just getting yanked up and down like a yo-yo, and not in the fun way, for years, for like a decade. It's a shame. So I'm interested to hear what you think in the comments down below. Like I said, would you ever want to see any of these versions of the characters come back in any regard? I personally, at this point, I kind of wish they had just done a clean split. I kind of wish they had just said, hey, nobody from the DCEU is coming back from any project if we're doing a new universe. I don't really know how I feel about like the certain actors are, certain aren't, because I think The Flash did a terrible job of explaining a flashpoint or a crossover or whatever, which it was supposed to do. I hope Peacemaker Season 2 does a better job. James Gunn said it will tie directly into Superman, so we will wait and see on that. But let me know your thoughts down below. If you want to support this channel, you can use Fortnite code DJAY123. Speaking of that, the day that this comes out, at least it was in the shop, they had Cyborg in the shop from Teen Titans, which I thought was pretty cool. Like the design around that, so using that code helps us out a lot. And we do have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled paper. Now, these are made from books that are damaged. What we do is we transformatively take that paper, rework it, turn it into a new piece of art or a vessel for a new piece of art in resin, and then we recycle the rest. And also my wife Jill makes handmade resin and beaded jewelry over there. Discount code DJAY123 will get you 10% off your first purchase. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.